My name is Rick Ambrose, the Executive Director of the Richmond Art Center. Welcome to the last program of the exhibition, Closely Considered Diebenkorn in Berkeley. It's been an incredible experience to have this body of work here at the Richmond Art Center by one of the great masters of the 20th and 20th century. And it's wonderful in the sense that it gives us a close view, intimate view of Diebenkorn's drawings, his wisdom, his innovation, evocativeness, and an opportunity that these works inform his paintings, inform his body of work. This would not be possible without one individual who came to me a couple years ago to say, would we be interested in having a Diebenkorn exhibit? And that is the guest curator to my left, Genn Worm. She would say that it would not be possible without the support of the Richard Diebenkorn Foundation, because the foundation really helped us do the research, helped us identify some of the collectors, and also the collectors themselves for sharing their private works to the public. And I want to acknowledge Andrea Ligori, who's the managing director of the Diebenkorn Foundation. One other thing, the exhibit closes on November 16th. We have a closing party. That's a Sunday from 3 to 5. We'll have some drinks and food for just the closing hours of this fabulous exhibit. And not just this exhibit, all the exhibits that we have here. That is the Tom Holland works Tom Holland to my left, sitting right here. His works for the past 40 years. Also, we have the work of etchings, or actually lithographs, by Frank Lebdell, and as well as the social discourse in print show that's in the community gallery. All these exhibits are really symbiotically connected in many ways, not just through friendships and knowledge, but also through time and media and purpose. So it's wonderful to have this set of exhibits here at the Richmond Art Center. And this would not be possible for the support of individuals that made these exhibits possible, and I like to acknowledge them. That is Susan and Stephen Chamberlain, the Jacobs and Company, James J. Curtis, Harry and Mary Margaret Anderson Foundation, the Mechanics Bank, Gruen and Gruen Associates, William and Kathleen Keller, Ellen Gal Toki and Owen Oakley, and Blick Art Supplies. In addition to having these programs videotaped, I want to thank Elizabeth Moyer and Michael Palanda for making this possible. I also want to thank the foundation again for making the second edition of the catalog that we have that you can buy for $25.
Carl Schmitz.
Oh, Carl Schmitz.
Without him, we wouldn't have.
Yes, this is a very, the illustrations, they illustrate each of his work in the catalog. That's in the show, it's illustrated in the catalog. And the quality of the printing is extraordinary. And in fact, they went the extra effort to go to some of the private collectors' home to re-photograph a couple days before we even could send it to the printer. So that's how important this, getting this production done correctly and faithfully to the original work. So what I'd like to do is to reintroduce you to Genn Worm, and she will introduce to our panelists. Genn.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. So thank you all for joining us. And the first thing I'm going to do is sit down with you all. And I just wanted to say that really this whole exhibition started, the genesis, because I was spending time with friends who were painters, and they had works of Richard Diebenkorn in their collections. And they were looking at his work every day, and they were really relating to it and feeding off of it, and this work was sustaining them in a really extraordinary way over decades of art practice, and that was really fascinating for me. And then as I got to know some of our wonderful collectors in the Bay Area, in Berkeley, I also saw that they had a very special attachment to Diebenkorns that they had. And so this exhibition, in fact, does come from all of us who are here. You know, we are his former students, and we are people who have done art in really in dialogue with Diebenkorn for half a century, and we are people who've collected and held his work quite precious to us. So what I would just like to do is pass this microphone immediately. And I think that we're all really interested in knowing how these other artists have taken what they've learned as students, as fellow artists, as holders of his legacy, and to talk a little bit about that immediate impact that knowing Diebenkorn's work and knowing Richard Diebenkorn had on them. So I am going to start actually with passing this mic to Tom Holland, who was not a student of Diebenkorn's, but who shared a teacher, because they both studied with David Park, and he was a friend for a lifetime. And I'm going to pass this to Tom.
I don't know quite how to start this. I was a student at Cal in 1957, a student of David Park's. And David hired me to be kind of a handyman around his house, clean the house and mow the lawn and stretch canvases, which I was just slightly better at than he was. Not much better, but slightly better, and framed them and that kind of thing. So I was very privileged to get to know David quite well, and through David I met Dick Diebenkorn and Elmer Bischoff, and it was just a wonderful time for me. And when my wife and I went to Chile for a year in 1960, and I got a note from Deed Park saying that because I had written and David had not written me back, that David would be gone by the time I got home. And of course that was a huge blow, because he was only 49. And but when we got home, I actually started teaching here, teaching children, and got to know Dick Diebenkorn quite well. And it was a great period of time for me. David was an amazing man, and so was Dick. And one of the most important things to me, this is a very personal thing, but as a young artist, I thought that I was going to have a kind of life where I couldn't have a family, or I'd have to move to New York, or I'd have to, really miss a lot of things in life that I didn't want to miss. But when I saw Dick and David, they had perfectly normal lives, kids and grandkids and homes and dogs and cats and pets, and it was really a relief.
We're going to try and hold the mic really close up so that you can hear us really well, and you don't forget a word that we say. So on my right is June Felter, who has been painting all these years since she was a student of Richard Diebenkorn.
Well, thank you. Is this working all right? Closer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was lucky enough to have a couple of classes with Richard Diebenkorn, and I understand there are some students here today who might like a couple of words about what that was like. He was a very conscientious instructor. He never gave any advice to the class as a whole or any suggestions. He worked very much individually with each person, and you had to let him know that you wanted to talk to him. And he would talk as long as you needed to and give you all the attention that you needed. And I found that was really interesting because I was used to classes where instructors would, give a project for the whole class. Well, it wasn't like that with Diebenkorn. And then at the Art Institute, I had the classes with him, but he occasionally would have to be out of town, and then Elmer Bischoff would take over the class. So that was pretty interesting to have that variety. I thought I was very lucky because I was crazy about the figurative approach and thought I had discovered David Park at the De Young Museum, I think in one of the first shows that he ever had, and I had been doing commercial art myself, and I'd gotten tired of it, and I wanted to do something more than that. So I started going to museums and galleries and discovered David Park. I was blown away by it. I just thought this was the most marvelous work I'd ever seen, and proceeded to try to get a class with him. Well, that was impossible. He was at UC Berkeley. I would have had to sign up, go to 4 years at UC Berkeley. If I was lucky, I'd get into the class. So this was all the early 60s. And seeing this show brings all of those feelings and excitement back to me. I just think it's absolutely thrilling. And I'm glad that I had that experience with those artists. I could tell you a lot of little things, but in general, it was just interesting to watch Diebenkorn getting ready for the class. Sometimes we had a model, and he would stage the setting, and I thought, oh, gee, that's great. I can hardly wait to get into it. And then he'd go change it, and I think, oh, but it was better. And then I'd think, oh boy, I'm going to get going on this. I can hardly wait. And then he'd go and he'd change it again. I think, oh, for God's sake. But it was always better. And I don't know exactly what to say I learned from that, except that he gave you an example of a real sensitive response to imagery that somehow seemed to be extremely important to me. And I've always thought of that when I'm doing anything. It doesn't even have to be art. Is that it? So that's the main thing that I wanted to mention today. And just briefly, at that time in the early 60s, there were a lot of opportunities for artists to show their work in the City Hall or San Francisco. There was a big outdoor area in front of the Civic Center, and they'd have these big shows. Everyone was welcome. I mean, you didn't get kicked out. Everyone was there. All the big shots, Diebenkorn and Bischoff, everybody was there. David Park even showed some of those things. And I don't think that's the case anymore. If you could get that going again, it would be an advantage, I think, for everyone. And, well, I could go on and on, but I don't think I want to say any more. You can ask me questions later if you want to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deanna Forbes is also a student at Richard Diebenkorn, and I'd like to pass the mic to Deanna.
The faculty shows were great. But the strange things, I'd come from UC Berkeley and expected to get assignments. At the Art Institute, you were just kind of launched and expected to paint something. And one time, Richard Diebenkorn came along, and I was one scared little 19-year-old, and he said, is that the painting you were working on a week ago? And I said, yeah. It was better then. And that was a great lesson for me. I mean, I knew at that, I carry that with me all the time because you can go back into it. He wasn't going to stop me, so I had this little product. It was that I could keep working on something, I could bring it back. It was a great lesson. And it's something I will, when I reach a kind of bad point in a painting, which I always do, I keep working on it and either bring it back or not. But that was the lesson. And the faculty shows were great. And I thought life was always going to be like that. Lovedale, Bischoff, Weeks, Jefferson. Life was good.
And I would like to pass the mic right away now. Right away. I mean, it's been right away. To Terry St. John. And Terry was not a student of Diebenkorn's, but of Jim Weeks. Terry knew all of these guys.
I became aware of Richard Diebenkorn, the teacher, through my good friend, my best friend, Henry Brandon, who's now seated right to the right there. I'm happy he showed up. And I would visit, he was studying at California College of Arts and Crafts, which is now CCA, and he was working on paintings in his studio downstairs in his parents' house. And I was just really interested in everything he was doing at that school, but particularly Richard Diebenkorn. I went over to the school, to meet Henry one day, and I went up to the huge studio they had in those days where Diebenkorn was teaching. And I saw these marvelous paintings the students were working on, large paintings, and just with a lot of loose paint, gobs of paint, just sort of images emerging on these canvases. I was just, from then on, there was just something there. I was just hypnotized by it, and I loved it. And at the time, I was a student at Cal, and I was a sociology major, and I'd made up my mind, I was about a senior, I made up my mind, I didn't like sociology that much anyway. And I made up my mind that I wanted to become an artist. And I didn't know how to go about it, and I was very naive. And, but I soon met a lot of Henry's friends, and there's a listing I made of some of the people I met. I met Henry Fujioka, who was a marvelous student of Diebenkorn's, who would paint these wonderful, juicy landscape paintings on the spot around Oakland. Craig Hansen I met. And then I heard of this painter that I never met, who surfaced years later in San Francisco, Henry Wierm. And there was another painter by the name of Alan Dart. These brilliant, he was brilliant himself. He could really talk. And he did these paintings that were just wonderful. And the school was just loaded with talent there. It was just amazing. And I think part of the reason for all the talent there was that at the time the accreditation was taken away from California School of Fine Art, which is now the San Francisco Art Institute. And so Manuel Neary was there, and Peter Volkus was there, and it was just a hub of activity. And so these people that I met there continued to be lifetime friends. And soon I saw Richard Diebenkorn's work. It was either at the De Young or the San Francisco Museum of Art. And I was very confused when I first, just in the same way, when I looked at the paintings, they were so loosely formed. And I definitely liked them, but I didn't understand them. And so my education as an artist started with Diebenkorn. I later studied with Jim Weeks at California School of Fine Arts. And, but now I've been painting now for years, and I have a library of Richard Diebenkorn. Anything I can find on Richard Diebenkorn's, I collect and I look at and I study. I don't paint like Richard Diebenkorn, but he taught me so much about painting. I did get to meet him, Richard Diebenkorn, later when I worked at the Oakland Museum as the curator of modern painting, and I got to meet him, and I enjoyed that and talking to him. And he was always very gracious, and as people have already said, very easy to talk to and very generous with listening to you and with his responses. And so I have to say, he was just an important part of my life. And he taught me such things as, never directly through my studying his work, that if you have a figure and you have a window, it's not just put there. It's not just a window there. It's put there in the right spot. And everything's important in a painting. Anything that's in the painting is extremely important. I know with Lucian Freud, I remember seeing a book, and with Freud's work, he had this figure that was beautifully painted, and then it was just a window stuck in back, and it bounced, to me, it bounced off the page because the total image didn't work. And when I think of Diebenkorn, I always think of the total page. Everything has to work. And so I'm just greatly indebted to him, his memory, and to his work. That's all I've got for the moment.
Thank you. I know we'll have lots more to talk about, and I just wanted to add before I pass the mic that, and if it didn't work, he painted it out. So on the other side of the piece of paper, of the canvas, we have with us Carla Kandinsky, who is a model for this famed drawing circle. I'm going to pass the microphone to Carla.
This is a real treat for me. I'm seeing people I haven't seen in ages, like June Felter. I've worked for June. I worked for Tom Holland when I was just beginning modeling. I worked right here at Richmond Art Center. But I can say that probably I'm the only person in this room that Diebenkorn has seen nude. I knew nothing about the Bay Area. I knew nothing about art. I had a landlady who had graduated from CCA, and in order to pay part of my rent, I used to pose for her. And she suggested I go to UC Berkeley and go to the art department, and I did. And I told them fabulous lies. I said I had modeled in Paris. I had modeled at Indiana University, which probably was not a good thing to say because most of the models at Indiana University were borderline hookers. But they didn't know that. And then I got in the Bay Area Models Guild, and I was telling Tom Mogensen on the way over here, our booking agent had never seen any of us. She was a disabled woman in a wheelchair. She did not want to see us because she would be prejudiced. So one day she said, "Do you want to work for the Wednesday night guys?" And I said, "Sure, where are they?" And she said, "In Berkeley." They were 2 blocks from my apartment. And it was Elmer Bischoff, Richard Diebenkorn, and Frank Lobdell. To me, they were still the Wednesday night guys. I knew nothing about who was famous, who wasn't. But they were fun. They were fun to work for, except they did want hard poses, and we called them the Trinity, and sometimes we called them the Terrible Trinity. Because I remember one time I was taking off a slip and I had it over my head and my arms in the air, and Elmer Bischoff said, "That's a lovely pose, can you hold it?" It was fun to work for them because it was like all week they taught. They all 3 were teaching. Elmer and Richard Diebenkorn were at the Art Institute. I think Frank Lobdell might have been there too, but Wednesday night was their night to draw. It was their night to enjoy. And they had sandwiches and coffee and music. And I was married at the time. My husband came to pick me up one night, and he heard all the laughter and the clinking of glasses. And I came out, and he said, "Are you sure that was a modeling gig?" So I know a lot of people in these drawings. I could walk around and tell you who they are by name. Richard Diebenkorn used a model a lot named Carla Lopez, Renee Shedroff, Norma Lystico. His book that was published at Stanford, just simply called Diebenkorn, is full of the drawings of the models I knew then. I did work for him at the Art Institute. I'm assuming, from what I've found in old journals, I worked for a painting class. I brought something with me. This is a book by Peter Steinhardt. It's called The Undressed Art, Why We Draw. And with permission from the Diebenkorn estate, he did get a drawing to put in there, and the drawing is of me. And I'm reclining, and I have my hand on my head, and I used to name the drawings he did of me, and that one was called Excedrin Headache number 39. I also have one that says, "Uh-oh, I'm looking at the timer." And there's one that says, basically to me, "Boy, what a bad hair day." They worked mostly in charcoal, ink, gouache. I love the sound of gouache. I don't know if I ever pronounce it right, but it just feels so good in your mouth that I think it must feel good on the paper. I have never done any artwork myself. I am a writer. I put out a lot of little self-published books with drawings in it that art students gave me. I put them in my book. I turned around and sold the books back to them. So, I work for a lot of people at the Art Institute that have already been mentioned. Jim Weeks. I work for Manuel Neri. I worked in sculpture for Jeremy Anderson. Donald Wagant. This was in the 60s, and the Art Institute was a very dirty place and very exciting to work at. And I have always said that when I die, which may come sooner than we want, I am 77, that I want to be cremated and simply scattered on the floor of an art studio. Because no one ever sweeps them, and I will be there forever. Thank you. Thank you.
So I just saw that Nancy Genn is back here, and I'd like to hand the mic to Nancy, because Nancy's a wonderful painter, and she's lent to the show, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the influence of Diebenkorn's.
This is totally unexpected. Well, I knew them, and I was in awe of them, all of them, and I think Diebenkorn has been the greatest influence on my work and my life since Mark Tobey. I just am in awe and admiration of this exhibition. I think all of us have been conversing about it, and we thank you, Jan, so much for making this possible, and all of you.
So since we just have this one mic, I'm kind of going to walk around, but is there someone who'd like to talk about how Diebenkorn's work came into their lives, and or somebody has a question of someone up front, or yes, Andrea.
Of course, my interest is great in Diebenkorn working at the foundation, and I've seen every drawing of you that we know about. We think there may be some others out there we'd love to find, but can you tell us, Carla, we've heard that the artists in the Wednesday night group took turns selecting the poses. They'd have their week where 1 week it would be Dick, 1 week it would be Elmer. Can you say something about that? Is that an accurate piece of information? Thank you.
You basically want to know how they selected their poses. It varied. It was left up to the model sometimes. Like I said, they frequently like to catch you doing something, putting on a shoe, taking off a slip, reading a book on your break. There's a marvelous, marvelous drawing of a woman with something thrown over her shoulders that actually looks like a trench coat, not a robe, and she has her hands out toward the heater. It is just absolutely gorgeous to me because it's so realistic. I remember their studio was comfortable. You can't say that about every studio. I have some vague recollection that they had a bed or sofa of some kind to do reclining poses on. They like to play jokes on each other. Maybe Mr. Diebenkorn would go down the hall and Elmer would hide his drawing materials. And he would come back and there would be the notebook and no charcoal, no pens, no nothing. They did have some very distinct ideas of what they wanted for poses, and I think they were really very good at explaining to models what they wanted. A lot of art teachers aren't. They just give you this kind of vague. I actually had an art teacher once ask me to do something boring. So I don't know if that answers it or not.
There's one more question I wanted to ask you. Was there any specific type of lighting that the Diebenkorn liked? I mean, did they work with their lights? They have special lights there or what?
I would say they probably did. I mostly worked in Elmer Bischoff's studio that was above the Volkswagen showroom in Berkeley. The studio was very, very high ceilinged. I'm sure they must have had spotlights of some kind to turn on the models, either to get backlighting or to get shadows or whatever they were particularly looking for.
Sorry, one more for Carla. Were you aware, looking around you, in what ways they changed their drawings from what they saw or what they started with?
Actually, my feeling is they did change them quite a bit. You have to remember that what I was posing for were mostly 10-minute drawings or 20-minute drawings. There's one Diebenkorn drawing, the one I call Bad Hair Day. where there are two drawings of the same pose, and it's just my head with my hand on it, and one of them, the hair looks like a fright wig, and in the other one, the hair, the face, the nose, everything are just basically the shape as it was. I think they used their imagination, and drawings were done quickly. You can see in one drawing of me, you can see an ink splotch on my hip. I mean, they drew quick. Some of Richard Diebenkorn's drawings, you can see the original lines inside the lines that he finally drew. And like I said, I know so many of the models in these pictures that it makes me lonesome.
This is for Carla. Do you still model?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. The answer is no? Oh, sorry.
Basically, my last job was in April of this year. I need a knee replacement. I've had 2 hip replacements. After you've modeled 50 years, what you get is hip replacements. No retirement, no old models' homes. I can still do portrait, I can do costume. My biggest difficulty now is getting off and on the model stand if the model stand is high. You sort of need a crane to lift me up, plop me in the chair, and say, stay. So.
I know reading is not fun, but I'd like to bring Diebenkorn's voice here. And I'd like to read just a little bit, and then maybe we can talk about it. Maybe some people will be interested in talking about this. This comes from the Archives of American Art interviews. The Smithsonian conducted them. And this interview was done in Los Angeles, conducted by Susan Larson in 1986. And Diebenkorn was talking about a little bit what we were saying with process. With me, and I'm sure with lots of artists, there are moments when you feel that things are looking pretty repetitious, and you somehow get set up on the canvas in a pretty familiar way, and at which time one, in a given mood, may want to reject this. You know, really want to stir things up and get off on a totally different foot. And which certainly I've done a lot, except almost always it doesn't really work. I mean, the new beginnings can provide great excitement for a couple of days, maybe one day. And then he chuckled. This is a transcription. And then finally, one looks and sees that, you know, you're really, maybe this work has certain excitement, but it really isn't about what you're about. And so it isn't. I don't think it's a pull. Sometimes it has felt to me like a pulling in of my horns, but to cut back and not insert those, not in the spirit of inserting those old tried and true things, but maybe simply in terms of making this thing, this piece viable. Well, so much of the old stuff creeps back in when one isn't looking. So, is there anyone who'd like to talk about this amazing practice of pushing work, and then somehow, and we see this, there is something which is innately Diebenkorn in his work, something which you find in your own work, which is innately your work, that you see no matter what you're doing, and that just seems to be right. I'd like to pass the mic to someone who'd like to talk about this, maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, what I've always said, and I don't know if it's true, that I think some painters paint from the center out, and some painters pay a lot of attention to the edges. And to me, Diebenkorn paid a lot of attention to the edges, and that's always stayed with me. I mean, I always like poses that are open. If I'm working from a model, there's a leg sticking out. And also, when I was a student, I thought that the teachers were posing the models very similar to the paintings they were doing. I could see it in the faculty shows. Oh, they gave us the same pose. Saw what we were going to do with it. And I really feel like I don't particularly like sort of balled up poses where there's a kind of lump in the middle of the page. I want something sticking out, and I'm looking around at the room and I'm seeing how all these shapes are coming in from the outside. And that's also what Terry was talking about, how you're considering the whole painting, not just the model separated from whatever the chair or whatever is in the background is equally important. I always like to get lousy poses. I mean, lousy places, like backlit or something kind of in the way. And a lot of beginners especially like things where the model is brightly lit with nothing around them, and there's nothing else to work with. So I felt like that's kind of the defining thing, and that also, of course, moved over into the non-objective work.
I'm sitting here, I'm looking straight at that. Actually, I think it's my favorite drawing in the whole show. The one in the corner above Terry's head. There's something really interesting about that. When you get, there are two things. He added paper on the bottom. That foot that's sticking out in the sort of just below the middle, I think that was the original end of the picture. And he added space to give it more gravity, I guess. And the other thing that's really interesting is the face of the model is completely scrubbed out and the paper is ruined. I don't know if it was erasure or like you taking your rough brush and scrubbing out whatever was there, but that really adds to the whole picture for me. It gives it a completely different texture, but there's subtlety without actually bringing in defined features. That one in this lithographic one that's above June's head. Those are my two favorites. That's all I have to say.
That one in the corner with the piece of paper is quite extraordinary, particularly because it shifts the perspective and where you as a viewer are standing. So if it had been just without that addition and that strip, the viewer would have been in closer proximity to the woman on the bed. And then when he adds the whole bedstand so it's visible, you're suddenly far back in the room, and it has this push-pull from the scale of the head to the figure, and it keeps you moving back and forth. It really draws you in. It's an extraordinary drawing. But it's wonderful to look at what he does in terms of restructuring the paper and the ratio when he takes something and he puts it closer to square or makes it completely square. He has a wonderful coffee cup and saucer that are perfectly square, symmetrical on a square piece of paper, where he's done the same thing of taping. It's really, he pushes everything to his will. Is there anyone else who'd like to talk about? Questions? Yes.
You're getting a lot of exercise here. I actually have a question for Tom Holland, whose work is here as well, and I wonder if he might talk a bit about it, and also in the context of that time period.
This may sound a little strange to you, but in 1959, I applied for a Fulbright just to get out of here and get away from the influences of someone as powerful as David Park and Dick and Elmer And I got a grant to Chile, which was as far away as I could get. And I worked for a year by myself, and it took a long time to get what I felt was my own idea of what I wanted to do. David, as a teacher, would paint on your canvas, and which was okay. You learned a lot that way, but I found that when I got as far away as I did in Chile, I continued to do little David Parks and big David Parks, and I was getting nowhere. So I finally just kind of started over and came back, I think, free of that kind of influence directly from the work, but not from the ideas of these wonderful people. David had this great attitude about materials. I remember him saying one time, paint is not gold leaf. Don't treat it like gold leaf. It's mud, and you've got to use it like mud. And certainly that stuck with me. So I developed my own work, and it's certainly not figurative anymore. And that was just a little episode in getting there.
Okay, well, to talk about this freeing up with your materials and about being free and not being precious with it, I think that that's what the drawing group was for them also, that being there and just drawing and knowing that they weren't dealing with any of the painterly concerns of the day in the studio was really important. And we have a couple of people here today who were in a drawing group with Theophilus Brown, with Bill Brown, with this incredible continuity of the generations. I was wondering if maybe Tom, Susan, you'd take the mic for a moment and talk a little bit about working with Bill Brown. We have a couple chairs right up front too. Do you want to sit in front?
I had the privilege of drawing with Bill Brown at Tom's studio at the end of his life. He would drive from the towers, and we'd spend 3 hours together drawing. One day, the models didn't show up, and so we drew each other. And so the painting on the wall there was from that group session. He was a very generous man and funny. He had a wonderful sense of humor and loved to tell jokes. Some of them I can't repeat. And I would drive, when it got so that he couldn't really negotiate the driving, I picked him up at the Towers, which is on Van Ness and Pine. And I would go on the back, and I could see him coming down the stairs with a smile on his face and his tote bag with his materials, and always a big smile. And he would get in the car with me, and when I could, I'd get him to tell stories. So he had many stories about the people that we were all talking about, and I just give you an example. He talked one time about how there was Beth Van Hosen and Mark Adams and Richard Diebenkorn, and they were drawing, and they were in the model, and the model had gotten up to for her break, and so Bill Brown went around to look at what Gordon Cook had drawn on his drawing, and it was a sailboat. And he was so tickled by that it was just so much fun. He told that story a number of times. I heard it about 5 or 6 times. So he was full of, he would just all of a sudden recite poetry. I'd go back and have lunch with him at the Towers and sit with him and his friends, and he would just start reciting poetry, and we'd talk about world problems and lovely, lovely, lovely things. And he always enriched my life so much in that period of time. It was a precious time, and I'll never forget him. So, and I'm thankful to Tom to include me in that drawing group. We're a very precious time.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Tom Mogensen. It's funny, we were talking about how people had met their lives came together with Diebenkorn, and I had about almost 5 minutes with him, interrupted by Theophilus Brown and Paul Lawn, and I was a little upset about that, but it seems to be in my life. I like to always say I once had dinner with Jacqueline Kennedy, and I did because she was right behind me. But and so the same with Diebenkorn, is I felt almost there. We've been doing drawing groups for years. That was the mainstay of Bay Area Figurative, and I've been with the Charles Farr group. There's one or two here that may have been there as well, and I run a few drawing groups of my own. I ran into Bill or Theophilus, depending on how well or how you knew him. Elmer Bischoff's wife said the other day, "Is that what he's going by now?" When we said, his name was Theophilus. So it was a thrill. I ran into Bill at an opening, and my painting happened to be just below his, and I was admiring my work, of course. But I engaged Bill in a conversation, and at that moment a model just happened to go by, and I said to Bill, you would enjoy drawing this guy, Alex Rosmarin is his name. And so Bill said, well then, put it together, do it. And we started that way, and every other Wednesday for about 2.5 years we drew together and grew together. Really fun. Also, I got to say, it's a thrill to see Carla. I've been working with her. I'm sure half the room has worked with her. So it's really fun to hear your stories. So that's about all I have to say.
Looks like Rick has something he wants to talk about.
I have a question about Diebenkorn as a teacher. And I was going to wonder if people on the panel could comment on when you took classes with him, his knowledge and wisdom in critiquing your work. Did you see him as a teacher or as an artist when he spoke those pearl wisdom of how your work was producing, growing, and evolving? And so if anyone could answer that question, I appreciate that. Then I have a follow-up question.
Sorry.
He wasn't really articulate. I mean, I didn't get a lot of words from him, whereas someone like Elmer Bischoff could go on and on. Half of it, I didn't know what he was talking about. But I do remember him being really frustrated with one of my paintings and grabbing the brush and just making a mark. And that still stays with me. That mark he made on that painting meant something. And it was like, oh, much more than if he'd gone on and on and on about why that would have worked. But he was frustrated and I was frustrated, and our language was form, not words. So that was my experience with him.
I've never seen him do that. I don't know. That must have been hard. But what I did when I got out of school was I walked away from the idea of teaching. And I didn't come to teaching until actually 1993, which was a very significant year. It's the year that Joyce Treeman died, who was a teacher of mine at UCLA. It was the year that Richard Diebenkorn died, who was my teacher at UCLA, and my father died. And I think that at that point, I guess I thought I probably had something that I'd received from these individuals and something that I could pass on and probably should. And I began teaching. And what I think is really interesting is that when I had thought out of school I couldn't teach because all I would be doing would be sort of parroting what I'd heard over my many years as a student, I found that all the things I was doing 20 years later that I thought were mine, in fact, were not necessarily mine. So that when I told students to, if they didn't know about it, color, to put it on a piece of paper and hold it up and tape it on, or, you know, see how it looked. In fact, I'm startled now, but if you look to see how Diebenkorn was working, that's what he was doing, and I'm sure it came from someplace. I don't know that it didn't come from someplace deeper, because I just recently was at the University Art Museum and saw Hans Hofmann teaching on film, and Hans Hofmann was doing critiques with students and just putting colored paper over and handling the formal aspects of painting the same way. I saw recently some footage, documentary footage of David Park's aunt, who was also a painter. And she was looking at a painting and working on it, and she took some colored paper and put it, put it up on the sleeves of the figure for the jacket, and was working the same way. So when we say, use a mirror and look at the image in reverse so that you see weaknesses in your composition, we can say, well, yes, I got it from Diebenkorn. And then we can also say, well, I was reading Leonardo da Vinci's book on painting, and he's suggesting the exact same thing, that we look at it in reverse. So I think that there are a lot of things that are intuitive, and there are a lot of things that come to us, and we recognize them and we internalize them. It's a huge mix, and I think all these years later, it's pretty hard to remember exactly what came from which source. Maybe somebody else wants to talk about it.
I have a question. As a student of Diebenkorn's life, you are, who were his teachers? Besides?
Did you study with Hoffman?
Was it influences like Daniel Mendelowitz and others like that?
Mendelowitz definitely, and Hans Hofmann via Earl Loran at UC.
Well, the Cézanne was really, really strong, and Matisse. I mean, when we talk about who we studied with, I think we're talking, like Terry was saying, he has studied with Diebenkorn, studied Diebenkorn not directly, but through his work. And I think, Matisse and Cézanne are really there as teachers, along with David Park, even though it wasn't like a physical connection. Although I do know that Park met Matisse. So Park was very young, and Matisse was on his way to Tahiti, and he was in San Francisco for 3 days, and there was a big luncheon for him, and David Park got to meet him. So, we're all drinking from the same Kool-Aid, I think. Yeah.
Also, as a teacher, did he was open to other concepts and styles that were going on at the same time than minimalism and pop art and many movements that came about at 60s or 70s? Did he talk about them in class, or did he allow students explore different directions in their work?
Well, I think in terms of like a life painting class where you have a model and you're painting. Everyone's there to take care of that, requirement and get those skills. He does address conceptualism here with Susan Larson, if you'd like me to, if anybody's interested. Maybe someone wants to talk about something else while I look for it here, because I know it's in this copy. Would you like to talk about painting? Thank you.
Well, somebody mentioned the idea of the 60s and things happening, and I remember at the Art Institute in general, in the early 60s, a lot of ideas from New York came to San Francisco. There was an exhibition at the San Francisco Museum, and minimal art was introduced, and there was something before that. The Art Institute had Richard Diebenkorn and Elmer Bischoff, and it had Frank Lobdell and Jack Jefferson, and it sort of it was like an academy, a good academy, and it sort of had tight ranks. You know, you worked in a certain way, you learned how to put a painting together in a certain way. I mean, there'd be a lot of variety in there, but painting was important, and how it was done was important, and so when these new ideas came in, that was sort of the first chink in the whole thing, how it started to come apart a little bit. And it took quite a while at the Institute because Diebenkorn left to teach at UCLA, Lobdell left to teach at Stanford, and you still had some important people following this development, such as Bruce McGaw, whose name hasn't been mentioned today, but he studied with Diebenkorn at California College of Arts and Crafts, and then after I think he got a BA, he went and taught at the California School of Fine Arts, and he maybe more than anyone has continued in the same path of Diebenkorn laid out, and does a marvelous painter still, and you don't see much of his work around. It would be nice to have a show of his here, but and I think he recently retired at the Art Institute, and then before that, Julius Satowski, although he was not part of this San Francisco group, he came I think sometime in the 60s, late 60s maybe, and he had a tremendous impact at the Art Institute as a teacher, and a magnificent painter, and he was a close friend of Lobdell's and Jefferson's, and then the whole time Jefferson was there, he had an impact even on figurative painters, because there isn't that much separation between figurative painting and abstract painting. A lot of the same visual elements are used, like Frank Lobdell, for example. He was very good at doing figurative work, but he painted primarily in a more abstract way, but he still did figuration. If you really look, it's fairly figurative. It's just his own world that he invented there. And sort of rambling on here. Does somebody want to help me out? One thing that was mentioned, you know, what did Diebenkorn talk about in class? I mean, specifically, like I remember my friend Henry, who's over there, I asked him about that, and he talked once about, you know, how you put together different areas of a painting, like he liked one section of a painting you'd talk about. And I think in some ways, this is how he taught. You know, you learn how to put a painting together, and there wasn't any formula. And it was done by, you look at Matisse or you look at other great artists. He might show in class, I remember Henry told me there was a slideshow, and he would include Vermeer in there. And it wasn't just contemporary or modern painting, but, you know, you'd talk about, you know, artists of the past. And and that was what I grasped from all this was that great painters of the past were important also, and you studied them just as carefully as you study a contemporary or modern artist that you like. Jim Weeks, he came via, I think, Diego Rivera in his early stuff, and he always was very close to the Mexican muralists, and he studied in Mexico mural painting. And I did study with him, and he didn't have any formula for teaching, but he would talk about different things at a very high level. And it was your first painting class, so it was very easy to get confused. And but he would talk about strong forms, and by that I gathered like gestures. You look at Rembrandt and how the hands are so important, and then the weeks would mean how the darks and lights ran through the figure and into other parts of the painting, and how colors did the same thing. And he pointed once something out to me about the use of red. He'd look at a model, and there was red underneath her, and then how you would run that through the figure also, and on up, you'd get the colors to start to move in a painting. And all of these good things were taught. And I don't think, a lot of these people couldn't survive teaching today because there have to be formulas somehow now when you teach. You have to have it all laid out ahead of time, just what everybody's going to learn and all that. And I think Weeks started to have a hard time in his last days teaching at the Institute. Because I remember, Deanna, you talked to me once how there were 3 people interested in what he was talking about or something like that. Maybe you would talk about that?
I took Weeks's drawing class, and I think he usually had a model, and he'd go around the room and everyone was painting non-objectively, or drawing non-objectively, and my ex-husband would come in, and he was a non-objective painter, and he would draw from the model because he felt really sorry for Weeks, and I was doing the figure, so there was just a few of us working from the setup he put up for us, and everyone else is sort of flailing away on non-objective paintings or drawings. Also, I just want to say something. There was very clearly delineated non-objective painters and figurative people. I sort of had a foot in both camp. But there were also baseball teams, the Figs against the Abs, which would play now and then. And there was a lot of rivalry. But it was very delineated. I remember Lobdell said Charlie Strong, my ex-husband, was one of his, because he was an abstract painter.
Comment on some of these things.
Well, I'm impressed with this audience because what we're talking about, the 1960s work, is quite a long time ago, but there's still all this interest. It's as vital as ever. So I think it's really great that we all met today, and I'm glad that it turned out so well. Thank you all.
I was asked before about conceptualism, and I don't have that part of the transcripts of the interview, but I do remember that when asked about this, and sort of in the context of whether or not he questioned painting for himself, he used a term that was being used then, and he uses it in quotes with some annotated chuckling, and he said that for him, he never doubted that painting was a viable vehicle for what he wanted to do. And so he never felt a need to look beyond painting in terms of his own work, even though everything around him was in the moment leaning toward, I mean, in Los Angeles in particular, conceptualism. But that painting remained a challenge for him always, and certainly engaged him. He never was looking for something else. I have something else I'd like to say. One of the things that Peter Seltz mentioned when we were talking before this exhibition opened was that he never thought that Diebenkorn would leave figuration and go back to abstraction. That that really surprised Peter. And we were talking, and what I found in these interviews that he did in '86 was this point that he made that in a way he'd never made a decision to go from one to the next or back, but that it was something that he reflected on at all times. And I think this would be interesting, talking about the two schools between abstraction and figuration, because for him, he said this was something that he thought about and was there every day, always, that it was always a matter of making that decision fresh in terms of what he was going to do. And that there, you know, there are distinctions, and yet there aren't distinctions in sort of very, very interesting relationship to abstraction and figuration. Do you want to talk particularly, Deanna, to that? Is there anyone here who in their own work has made radical shifts between figurative periods and abstract periods? I'm going to give the mic to Arthur Monroe.
I don't want to belabor the subject, but one thing that is interesting, I was with Hans Hofmann in his studio on 8th Street. Those of you who've been to New York understand that that was where one of his famous classrooms were, and everybody would come there. And in this tiny little space, you would walk around and criticize your paintings or what you were doing. In any case, one of the things that was important was this push-pull that you guys have just mentioned was all about going back into what you had done and extracting from it what the essence was that you had been working on. That was the pull, and that was the push and pull. And another way that he would get you to understand this part of thinking was that when you can't analyze a painting, the best thing, in his words, get yourself a stepladder and go up as high as you can on that stepladder. Take a mirror with you. Look at the painting through the mirror and not directly with your eyeball, and you'll find the change that you're trying to look for. These little tidbits of wisdom about how to think about the visual organization of an image was entirely new, novel, and unique. And another thing was, it just slipped my mind. The thing I wanted to remember about Kandinsky, who people have called the father of abstraction. You remember, abstraction was not an American language about painting or description of a painting until the breakthroughs had occurred after the war. So one day he had been painting, put the painting against the wall, left the studio, went for a walk, and came back. When he came back, he saw that the sunlight had come through a window and had pasted itself against that wall, and it also pasted itself against the painting. He had never seen those images before. And that gave him the idea that you could go back into the work with another help from some existing something or another. Well, you can see that in everybody's painting, and especially in Matisse. You see him and the boy at the piano. You can look in that painting and see all kinds of other images that he wasn't interested in coming into the picture format. And that changed our thinking, changed my thinking, and my approach to reading forms, and figure certainly was a part of it. Anyway, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm so glad you mentioned that Matisse painting, because the piano lesson was a slide that Diebenkorn, in fact, would show in class. So he did show slides, and he did show Matisse, and that painting in particular. Did you have, way back here? I'm coming.
This is for everyone, whoever. What would you say is the legacy of Diebenkorn and the figurative school, Bay Area?
Is there someone who would like to give us a big summing up? What would you say would be the legacy of Diebenkorn? Thank you.
Well, I can't speak to the legacy for everybody, just for myself. I know at Arts and Crafts, I talked earlier about a group of very talented students there, and they went on not to paint like Diebenkorn afterwards, but like Julio Ramos, for example, at one point when I think before he went to Arts and Crafts even, he could paint almost like Velázquez. And then when he was painting with Diebenkorn, he did some beautiful figurative work. And then later he went to the Art Institute and he created some really beautiful figurative pieces. Then a few years down the line, he was Venezuelan, and he had to interrupt his painting with being an apprentice consular for the Venezuelan government in Hamburg. And then he finished with that, and he got married, and then he found S, and that was the 70s. And then his painting career became rather sort of changed abruptly, and he started doing very minimal imagery, sort of like of suns and planets and watercolors, and they were quite beautiful. And he had a show at the Oakland Museum. He was in a group show once with some of those pieces. But he didn't develop as a figurative painter, even though he had those great gifts. And that's sort of what happened to the whole group of these people. They went their own direction, and a lot of them, I don't even know what happened to them, like Alan Dart, I don't know, I haven't heard from him, and I never knew him very well anyway. I knew of him through Henry. And the Roger Brown, I think may have been a student, he was a student of Weeks, and he may have been a student of Diebenkorn at California College of Arts and Crafts, but he lives in Berkeley, and I think he still paints, but so this is the immediate legacy of some of the people that studied with him. My influence was from him was, I've already mentioned, that introducing me to a way of seeing, just as like when you study sociology at Berkeley, it introduced me to a way of thinking, and I started to think in a different way and analyze things. Well, Diebenkorn's work was very much like that with me. It taught, and it came about slowly, learning how to see things and put them together on a canvas or in an image, or even just looking at what's in front of you, how to see things differently. And that was a specific legacy for me. And then when Diebenkorn went on to teach at UCLA, and he was no longer painting figuratively, and he was doing the Ocean Park series, and he had a lot of magnificent students there. I'm sure I don't know directly of a lot of them, and Genn would know about that, but I'm sure they don't paint like Diebenkorn. But he encouraged people to think, to look at things, to put paintings together, to put images together, and that's a real legacy when they can sort of go in their own direction, and maybe you want to address some of that.
Well, I would just say that. Particularly when we look at Diebenkorn's works on paper, his drawings, his prints, we see that he had an extraordinary hand. His drawings are beautiful, we say masterful, a line that is just exquisite, always changing. He had amazing light, compositions that are astounding. He never let the edge slip away. He kept us directed and moving, and he has layers and layers that draw us in deeper and deeper. And so I think he set the bar so high for everyone, and he really made it impossible for us to not feel that we had to perform on all these different planes. And I think that's extraordinary in terms of a teacher and someone that we look to. I want to just say that before we wrap up, I want to say thank you to all of you who came. I am very grateful to all who have contributed. We have collectors here who have loaned us these precious pieces, and artists who've shared their work with us and their ideas and thoughts. The Richmond Art Center, which has given us a place to gather for these weeks. And I want to say thank you very much to everyone. It's been really interesting. Yes. So there are a couple of announcements. Now I'm standing up. We have an extraordinary program coming up this week. On Thursday, the 6th of November, we have the Del Sol String Quartet. They will be coming. We have we have their violist right here with us. They will be coming on Thursday evening. It's going to be nice and early, 5:30 to 7:30. We will be right here. You'll have an opportunity to listen to the music that was written at the time that these works were all created. I think Erickson is on the program. We will have music right here. We will have the images really alive and vibrating with the music. They love it, and I hope you'll come and join us. If you are not a member, I have to make a pitch. If you're not a member of the Richmond Arts Center, I hope you will become a member of the Richmond Arts Center. I hope you will support this really extraordinary institution that gives so much to the community and so much to us. Again, we have a beautiful catalog. I hope you'll take a look at it. I hope you'll want to take it home with you. And thank you again for coming.